In this episode, we speak with Hari Ravichandran, the founder and CEO of Aura, a mission-driven technology company dedicated to creating a safer internet for everyone. In 2014, after Hari's credit card information was stolen, he was inspired to start Aura, and today, the company offers an easy-to-use, integrated suite of services trusted by more than 1 million customers. Previously, Hari founded Endurance Group, a leading provider of cloud services for small businesses, with worldwide operations and over 5 million customers. He is also the founder and CEO of Jump Ventures, a scalability infusion firm focused on long-term collaboration and strategically investing in businesses to drive exponential growth. I'm your host, RJ Lumba. We hope you enjoy the show. If you like the episode, click the follow. Hari, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. It's a delight to be with you.
Thanks for having me.
So, refreshing on your background, you've been a very successful entrepreneur a couple times over. I'd like to ask you, where you sit today, what is propelling you forward? What is most exciting to you? Presumably, you've done well in your career, presumably in multiple facets, monetarily as well. What drives you?
I've always been a problem solver and a builder. And that's just the way I'm made, I think. So in general, when you come across interesting problems that you feel could use a solution and, it sort of fits your wheelhouse of something you can build around, that gets to be the excitement. When you're first getting going, you start thinking about a lot of external factors and external things like, I need to make money, I need to, put away money for my kids, my family, all that type of stuff. And the further you progress, even if that is or is not a factor anymore, you start to realize that the real joy you get turns out to be building. That's what drives me forward.
I noticed it looks like you became a founder almost right out of school. Have you ever had a corporate gig or worked for someone else?
It was an odd time. In the late 90s, out of the Valley, I actually worked for a year and a half, about 2 years, for an engineering company called Sun Microsystems that eventually became part of Oracle. And I was doing chip design and sort of microarchitecture stuff there. The two things that sort of led me away from that, the first thing was, as I was building these things, they were very interesting problems. I was working on this thing called the prefetch cache, which is sort of a part of the microprocessor. And so it was one part of a microprocessor that was part of a board, that was part of a computer, that was part of one of 20 different computers in the line. There was one product line for the company that had 10 other product lines. So it just the amount of contribution just seems so small to me in terms of what I was providing to the company. And my interaction with the end customer that got to see the product felt so far removed. To me, it just felt like, it'd be nicer to be able to drive something that, that you actually have a real impact on. And the second thing was just the time. It was sort of the time that the dot-com boom was happening. Everybody was starting a company. There's just so much excitement and energy around this new technology called the internet. And, I wanted to be part of that. And so that took me down the path of my first company.
Recently I've been thinking more about the advantages of starting a company at different points in your life. And you got started early. Reflecting back, do you think it was an advantage to start early, given that, maybe you had just a ton of energy and you were willing to go above and beyond at every single moment? What advantages do you see? I mean, you can actually compare it to today, more recently, because you started another company later on in life. So I would love your perspective on that.
I think about this a lot. I think one of the greatest gifts I've had in my life is being able to get started early. I think that put me down a really good path for myself for multiple things. One, my burn was very low, so I could take a lot of risk. I didn't actually have a whole lot of other commitments. And so it was just me. And, I felt like, okay, well, I don't need that much. So worst case, if I go bankrupt, then, I just start back up again. So you kind of have this mindset of being able to take a risk. That's one. I think the other one that I didn't understand when I was a young founder was no matter when you start, whether you're 40, you're going to make a lot of mistakes. And that just is the way it is. Because you're trying to build something that isn't there. And then once you're done building it, it does exist. And that journey isn't mapped out, and you're sort of trying to figure it out as you go along. So you make a lot of mistakes. To me, the earlier the mistakes happened, it'll give you more runway and recovery time. So if you make a lot of mistakes in your 20s, you're like, oh, wait, like, let me not do that again. And so in my 30s, you don't make the same mistakes, maybe you make different ones and hopefully fewer. And so to me, as a 40 some odd year old founder for my current company, I felt like I made a lot of mistakes in the first 20 years of doing this as an entrepreneur that, like I always kid around saying, hey, if you make 100 decisions, probably 98 of them are wrong. So just don't do them again. And I got to make a lot of hundreds of mistakes along the way, which actually helped me learn quite a bit and get better over time as well.
Yeah, there's the
So,
counterpoint of having experience, but I presume starting early and maybe doing something novel almost mitigates the fact that maybe there is like less experience in that particular domain.
it's really interesting. I went to business school at Wharton, and they have an executive MBA program, which are typically people that are sort of later in their careers, probably 30, 35 years of age. They've been working for, 7, 10, 12 years when they kind of go join the program. And I was speaking with the dean of that program, and he said, hey, there's a lot of interest in entrepreneurship, but somehow we can't get a lot of these executive MBA program, sort of folks that are in it over the hurdle to actually kind of do the start. They have a lot of ideas, they have a lot of experience, they're very excited about it. And the reason for it is, in some ways, I say this a little tongue in cheek, but the W-2 is the enemy of the K-1. Once you get used to a paycheck, once you kind of start to build your life around a paycheck, building something for equity, the mindset just changes quite a bit. And again, people that are thoughtful, that are responsible, that feel accountable to other people in their lives, that bar keeps going up. And so the risk-taking ability goes down quite a bit. Now, to offset that, in whatever their career path is, the more experience they build up, they do start to make a lot more financial returns and perhaps purpose-based returns as well. But it may not be in the line of entrepreneurship. It may be in the line of, working through corporate America, basically. So that doesn't mean that you can do one or the other. This is just my broad view. Again, there's lots of breakout cases, which are different, but broadly speaking, I mean, in some ways, if you don't know what you don't know, it makes risk taking a whole lot easier. And so, and once you've had a few burns, you're like, oh, wait, like, I don't know if I want to go do that again, so.
Yeah, switching gears a little bit, as I was doing research for this, and I'd done research for like the hundreds of interviews I've done on CEOs, but you had something that was very cool and something I'd never seen before, in that you were being interviewed during a Minnesota Timberwolves game, and it was the coolest thing. You were courtside, and you had the reporter asking you questions about Aura. How often are you in kind of cool mainstream media like that?
It's really interesting. That's one of the fun parts of building Aura, because my last company, it was in the small, medium-sized business phase. We never really kind of embarked on a brand building exercise. This company is in the family safety space, and so we need to be somebody that's credible. So when families look at us today, like, are these folks actually going to take care of our data and information, all that? And so we did a sponsorship with the Minnesota Timberwolves. So we're the jersey patch sponsor. So if you look at the jerseys of the Timberwolves, you see the Aura logo on there. So as part of that, we get to go to Minnesota fairly often. And so that's been a really fun experience. One of the other fun experiences is we brought in Robert Downey Jr. as a board member, investor. So our board is very eclectic. We have Jeffrey Katzenberg, who ran Disney and then started DreamWorks with Steven Spielberg and David Geffen. We have Robert Downey Jr. We have Jim Cash, who was like the dean of the Harvard Business School for a while. So, he was on the board like Microsoft and Chubb and, a lot of these big companies as a real statesman. So, we've got private equity guys and venture capitalists. So I would say some of the more interesting, exciting times, even, more than courtside, is in our boardroom. Because these are a lot of different personalities. To get them all corralled together is always a fun experience, I would say.
So we'll dive into Aura, but before we do that, you had this whole like couple decades worth of building your first business, which has the coolest name, Endurance International Group. Tell us about that business and the evolution it went through over those decades.
As I was saying earlier, when I started Endurance, to just kind of give you a little view of my mindset at the time, which is looking around, everybody was starting companies like 1996, 97 timeframe. And Yahoo had started. There was at that point Hotmail. There's Excite, a bunch of exceptions, a bunch of the kind of early stage internet companies are coming out. I just felt this excitement and energy to go start something, but I had no idea what to go start. So I was like, well, I want to go build a thing. What thing do I build? So, I started talking to people and said, well, I want to go start a company. And people say, well, what are you good at? And, I'd say, well, I can program pretty well. I can understand the new internet technology that's coming out. And I said, well, how do I start a business? I said, well, maybe try to figure out how to package that in a way that, other people would need it. So I think at that point I had maybe, 8 grand in the bank or something. So I took 6,000 of it and bought ads on Wired magazine and a couple of other magazines that just said it was called, a technology company can help you get on the internet. Call if you have, if you have any needs. And cell phones had just come out, but I put down my cell phone number, and a couple weeks went by, and I thought, shoot, that's like the quickest fail in the history of all startups because I have no customers, I have no product, I have nothing, and so I just lose 6 grand. And then I got this phone call, and this person was another line said, "Hey, is this Innovative Marketing Technologies?" And I'd actually forgotten the name that I put on the ad. I said, "Oh yeah, that's me." And he said, "Well, I have a bookstore that's offline. I want to move it all to the internet. Can you help me with it?" And I said, "That sounds great. I can do that." And that's sort of how it got started, And so in the first year, we did maybe a couple of $1 million of revenue in the first 18 months. And then after about 3 years, I kind of realized that doing a consulting business is hard to scale margins because every client is different. And so you're doing different work for different people. So you never get the compounding. So then we switched into building a platform saying, hey, we want to find the thing that all these small businesses need, which was a hosting platform. So we started building that out. And we raised venture capital, went through the dot-com bust. And so spend a moment on that. On the dot-com bust side, we had raised a bunch of venture money. We were about 250, 300 people in the company. We're burning a lot of cash because our business model was to place ads inside our customer site. And we give them a free website and we put the ads on top. And when the dot-com bust happened, the business model failed because everybody pulled out ads and venture money couldn't ride up. So we basically had to go back to our customers and have them remove the ads and kind of force convert them into paying customers, saying, hey, like we won't do ads anymore, but if you need the service, you actually have to pay a monthly fee for it. We had like 2 million customers, out of which 20,000 converted to paying customers. We took the team down from 250 people to 14 people. And that's a lesson I'll never forget, to not hire in front of demand, because the excitement was so much and there's so much capital available, just like, hiring. And then, it's very painful to have to let go of 200 some odd people in waves. And it just really kind of still sticks with me. So anyway, we went through that and we started buying other competitors. Company got bigger. Eventually we sold it to Warburg and they said, hey, stick around, kind of help us keep running the company. So I stuck around, we took it public and eventually sold it again to a private equity firm. So and at the time I exited, the company was doing about 1.2 billion in revenues and it was generating about 400 million a year of cash flows. We had about 5,000 employees, 14 locations. So it all started with just me saying, hey, like, I just feel this need to go do something. And the biggest lesson I take away from it is, pretty much never lose if you bet on yourself. And I think, I think it's a continuous thing I have to remind myself when I feel like something's too risky. And just say, well, taking a risk on yourself paid off more often than not. And so that was my first experience.
What strikes me about that experience is that you survived. The company survived despite what was happening, the crazy things that were happening in the macro environment, the tech bust.
And the 07 down cycle, all of that. Yeah.
So I'd like to hone in on that. Do you think it was your ability to always think about what you could do, how you could turn it around, how you could maybe still exist in the next year and the next 2 years? What do you think enabled you to survive all of those circumstances?
I think when the hype cycle starts, right, depending on where you are in your stage of life cycle of the company, you could be the greatest thing since sliced bread, and then when the down cycle starts, they're like, wow, this is the stupidest idea ever. Like, I don't know why anyone would build a company around it, right? So I think getting sucked into either tailwinds, like crazy macro tailwinds or cheap capital, et cetera, or real headwinds is not in any way a depiction of the value of the idea and the execution, right? So I think what we kind of figured out, or what I figured out kind of early on, is if you have a product that people want and you can need to keep evolving the product, there are a lot of people that want it, that's sort of the first set of parameters. And then the next one I would say is don't overload on costs, try to kind of build costs into the business as the revenue comes in. We're just trying to get up. Sometimes you can't do it like a pharma company, for example, that's doing a new drug. They have to invest a lot up front. But for most software technology companies, you can kind of keep your demand and your spend and your demand kind of in sync, basically. And then the last one I would say for us was really having two gears in your head is basically continually thinking about, hey, what is this business going to look like in 10 years from now? But at the same time, have to keep worrying about, can I make my rent payment next month and, pay our employees next month? So having those two gears, I think really gives you a perspective on the decision making that you have, saying, hey, like, I know I'm making this decision because it's going to help me in the short run, but is it really going to harm my long-term vision or not? Or, saying, hey, like, I'm going to keep investing in the long term and I can't pay the rent next month. So sometimes they're in conflict, and the more you can balance that, helps you get more staying power while kind of trying to, have the resources you need to keep moving to the next step, basically.
Your first company was called Endurance, and everything we're talking about like moves towards this idea of building a durable business. Is that what you're always thinking about? Like, how is this thing going to last as long as possible?
It's funny. When we named the company Endurance, before we called it Endurance, it was called Bizland in the late 90s, basically, as when we started buying other companies. So we had multiple brands, so we had to come up with a new name. And at that point, we'd gone from 250 people to like 18 people or 14 or 18 people total. And I think the project we had that converted our free customers to paid was called Project Endurance around sort of this thing. And this investor came by and he said, oh, like, are you naming this after Shackleton's Endurance? I was like, what is that? And so then he came by and he dropped this book off. And I just fell in love with it. I was like, wow, this is such a great leadership story of getting stuck in the ice for like a year plus. This captain was able to bring all of his people back to shore alive. And, there's a lot of eerie parallels. And so it's both the durability of the business, and it's also, it just felt very emotionally in sync for me at the time. So
Now let's move over into Aura, which focuses on another area which I think will forever be needed, right? It's about security. It's about, a safer internet. Tell us about your thought process in starting the company.
yeah, I mean, I think you asked a lot of good questions, like thinking about durability, right? So when you think about durability combined with problem solving, you want to pick things that are hairy problems getting hairier. To me, both from my personal experience where I had a negative sort of safety occurrence that happened in my life, which was that my identity got stolen. And it was like a real pain for me to actually go through the process of getting that fixed. And I remember thinking, well, I'm fairly technical, and it was a really hard process for me. There's got to be lots of people that are not technical that have this issue as well. So when we started digging into it, it was a difficult problem. There really weren't any great solutions there. So the longevity of the company, to me at the time, felt like, okay, well, if we have the right product and the right set of features and, product going to work and resonate well with customers, the problem isn't getting any smaller. So you've got a lot of runway to build something big. And it felt like something that was impactful, like, it actually could help a lot of families kind of feel less stressed. And especially as we started adding things like parental controls to help families monitor kids that are going through overconsumption of internet or, getting to scary sites, et cetera. So the vision kept on evolving, but the space has always been the same. As we find more problems, we keep adding and extending the product as well.
Got it. And so what is the most prevalent use case for your product?
So today, a big problem in the market is that the individual solutions are pretty fragmented. Like, you can go buy a solution for password management, you can buy a solution for identity theft, you can buy a solution for scam prevention, you can buy a solution for privacy. And most families, say, well, I don't want to go curate and find 5 or 6 or 7 different things and then wonder if I'm safe or not. So our value prop is fairly simple, which is, can we take all these things, get it all into one solution that's very easy for a family to use and administer, bring it down to a price point that makes sense for most families to be able to afford it. And at the same time, can we make sure the solution is proactive? Because, safety is one of those things that everybody feels like they should do online, but they just don't, because it's either overwhelming, boring, it's some combination of many of these things. So we try to make it so that we can actually do the work on behalf of the family. So for example, we find your password in a breach, rather than come to you and say, you should go change it, we'll prompt and say, do you want us to go change it for you? And then we'll use technology to go change your password in your unsafe accounts on the back end, right? Instead of coming to you and saying, hey, you should call the bureau to lock your credit, we just do it automatically. So it's basically kind of taking away the friction from the process is really where we focus a lot of effort.
Mm-hmm. And did you decide to fund this yourself? Did you bring in outside capital?
Yeah, so for this one, what's interesting is for the first 8 or 9 months, I was self-funding it. And one thing I kind of realized pretty quickly is when you go for world-class talent, people have a little bit of a hurdle, I would say, because it's like a self-funded person. It's going to be like a mom and pop company, et cetera, type thing. So I called up General Catalyst, who's a venture capital firm, and I've known him on the CEO there since the late '90s, actually. And I said, I'm starting this thing, and I am having trouble recruiting. So can you guys, throw in some capital, match it? So let's do it half and half, and then we'll basically get started that way. So we ended up doing a $12 million round with General Catalyst, and sure enough, right after that got done, recruiting got a whole lot easier for us.
Got it. I talked to a lot of entrepreneurs, and then recently there's been kind of in the media this idea of the journey and how difficult it is, and there's moments of ups and downs. And this question of like, mental health comes into play, and there's, bouts of loneliness. Did you ever experience those kind of highs and lows and moments of like, man, I just wish I had someone I could talk to about everything that's in my head?
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely the case. I would say, especially over a long journey, sometimes you have waves that last months or years that you have to find your way through, especially if you put your heart and soul into building a thing and it isn't going the way you think it should, or it's facing a lot of adversity. It becomes very personal. There's a lot of weight for them on their shoulders, and that can have a real impact. So yes, like finding really good advisors or board members or other folks that you really trust that will tell you the truth and will not pander or just say yes, because they don't want to hurt your feelings or whatever, but really give you thoughtful advice. And the thing I found is if you can't find one person, finding two or three people that you trust that you can triangulate around, because when you have a decision that you're having a tough time with, or you have an existential issue that you're going through, when you talk to two or three people, thoughtful people will kind of converge around the same. It won't be exactly the same, but very similar sort of thought process. So I found that very helpful. And the other big thing that I found for myself is, you know, by definition, when you're building something, you're over indexing, right? And there's only, life has limited hours, limited resources that you have to divvy up in a way that you feel is driving your maximum balance and happiness. And so, when you're starting something, it's all consuming. So you're spending a lot of time on that, which means that's time away from friends and family, etc. And you can sustain that for a while, but if you go for too long, those things start to become, sort of under invested. And that then has an impact. I can drive a negative cycle saying, wow, like, I missed that game at my kid's school. Like so those things become a real thing as well. So I think the trick is, for me anyway, the trick has been to find the balance. And when I go through waves where it's all consuming, and sometimes, family becomes all consuming and you have to focus on that. I think about it in that same, 5 or 10 year window. I just figure it's all going to balance out. So basically, if you're going through this window where it's like 6 months or 9 months of like intense work at building something, I tell my wife and I tell my kids, hey, it's gonna be busy like the next 9 months. So I'm gonna make this up to you guys, but it's gonna be all consuming. And so you kind of get the stakeholders in your life to come along for the journey as much as you can. That helps a lot. And then knowing that you've now borrowed time from your wife and kids to actually go build this thing means you got to give it back. And so when things get a little better, you have to find those moments to basically go back. And so it is a continuous struggle for balance. It is hard. It is definitely something that has amazing highs and just terrible lows. And if you're thinking about doing this for, a long window of time, this is why a lot of people say, hey, like find something that you really feel passionately about solving, because if you don't, it's very hard to push through those down cycles. But if you're very passionate about the thing you're building or the building itself, it makes it a bit easier. But I have had, honestly, weeks or months where I've had trouble just getting out of bed and doing like the next thing, because it just feels like all this weight on you and you just have to push your way through it. It takes a lot of emotional energy.
If you were to kind of create the person that you would most want to talk to during those times, what kind of characteristics would that person have or experience would they have?
You definitely want someone that has been through the cycle before that can validate what you're feeling. Because at some point you're thinking, well, am I just weak? Like, is that what's going on? Am I not able to cut it? So you want to make sure that, it's someone that has accomplished, like for me anyway, like accomplished big things that I really look up to. And I say, wow, this person has really made a dent in the universe. Like they changed something, whatever their area of expertise is. And then when you talk to that person, they say, look, I went through this as well. And it was really hard and I had to push my way through. It becomes very validating because you see the end output that they built a thing that, we all look at it and say, wow, like the world is worse off if they hadn't done that. And so it's sort of an impactful leader, someone that is able to kind of validate the difficulty you're going through at that time, and someone that can take the time to actually spend with you and say, hey, like, let me tell you the 4 things I learned that actually can maybe help you as you're going through this stuff.
Well, we're coming up on time and I want to be mindful of your time. So a couple final questions.
Please.
One is, can you tell us about a person who has had a profound influence on you?
Oh gosh, so many people at different parts of my life. Recently, I would say Jeffrey Katzenberg, who's one of our board members. Here's a man that really has changed culture as we know it. He basically, more or less any movie you watch over 3 or 4 decades, he's had a hand in with the Lion King, Panda, a bunch of the movies in Disney, etc. Then he goes off and starts an animation studio. Then he left that to go start this fund that's one of our investors. And the thing that's amazing to me, he's 72. He works probably 12 to 14 hours a day. Just the work ethic is incredible. And the thing that always strikes me about him is he never looks back. He never looks back and say, oh, like I did that. I won X number of Oscars. He still has this like innate curiosity to figure out what's happening with technology, always talking about the future, always asking questions about the future. I find that really inspiring. And I find that to be something that both the combination of the work ethic and his, he knows everybody and still having this curious energy to keep moving forward. So, and again, that's the most recent one I've had. Many people in my life that I've felt come this way.
Excellent. Last question. Can you tell us about a charity, cause, or other endeavor that you're passionate about?
Yeah, so I'll give you 2. One is within Aura, we have this thing called the Corporate Social Responsibility Program, which is basically a program around inclusion. So there's a lot of these communities, like Black and Brown communities, Latin communities, foster kids, overseas military personnel that have a lot more family safety issues than the regular population. So we've been working with all of these communities through, and sometimes directly, sometimes with a partner, to make sure that they have the tools and the products and resources to be able to solve some of these issues. So we're as a corporate entity, that's something we're very passionate about, sort of the inclusiveness of other communities and product. And then both personally, and now it's starting to become more within the fiber floor as well. The mental health for kids issue isn't just a huge issue anymore. It's become epidemic. Self-harm is now at epidemic proportions. Suicidality is super high for the first time in many decades. The average life expectancy of kids is going down, which is basically neutralizing all of the medical gains we've had over a long period of time. Like you go to Boston Children's and you ask them, hey, what's your highest priority? They say, well, we have 3 priorities. It's mental health, mental health. So this just has become very pervasive. So that's something we're spending a lot of time, both within the company and from a personal standpoint, to kind of understand a bit better and see where we can fund and help out as well.
Well, Hari, I want to thank you for taking the time to chat with us today. It was a wonderful conversation. I know our audience will find this very insightful.
Thank you so much, RJ. Appreciate you having me.